So the question here is, wasn't NATMA created in response to what happened during the 2014 banjir in Kelantan? The reason why NATMA was created so that the country will have a dedicated disaster management agency that looks beyond response only. There's a need to build water retention ponds in all the housing estates. Widening drains is not the answer. I have to agree that widening drains is not the only answer. In all housing development, in fact in all development, there's a requirement to have on-site detention, and there are centralized detention ponds. And more importantly is to have the wider surface, the natural surface, to be able to absorb water and to retain it before discharging it smoothly to the ocean. Bila tak ada persediaan awal banjir, semua pihak kurang koordinasi dalam membantu mangsa banjir. Very true. So all this reaction here are pretty much the voice of the community, the rakyat. They have all the rights to get angry, to be frustrated, and the points are all correct. Hi, my name is Hafiz Amirul. I'm a humanitarian worker specializing in disaster risk reduction and management, and I've been working in this field for the past 17 years, and this is my expert opinion. The 2021 flood was said to have the amount of a 1-month rainfall that happens in one day. So that's huge. And it had caused destruction and affected more than 500,000 populations of the country, sadly killing more than 50, and had caused a total of 6.1 billion ringgit worth of loss and damages. Flood is not a new phenomenon in Malaysia, in any tropical country. But failing to manage the risk is also not a new phenomena. I think this is where we need to put our focus on, rather than blaming the environment, rather than blaming agencies and peoples. We need to work together so that we can at least reduce the risk. I mean, we can't stop the rainfall, but we can reduce the risk. There has been many mitigation efforts in the country, and I believe that the government has spent a lot of money in mitigating flood risk, which mostly comes in the form of engineered or hard structure. I personally believe that this should be balanced with the non-engineered approach, meaning that capacity exchange, information sharing, the soft approach of doing things. So we need to invest more on preparedness measures to the society, and also among government agencies, actors. Disaster management in Malaysia falls under Directive 20 of the National Security Council, or known as MKN Arahan 20, which the Arahan itself was drafted in 1993 after the Highland Tower tragedy. It is a very clear Arahan that stated at which level disaster management should be managed. Disaster level 1, level 2, level 3, and it clearly stated there that if a huge disaster that happened at the national level, it should be under the federal government. If it's impacting at the state level, it should be managed by the state. And if it's happening at the local level, it should be managed by the pejabat daerah. So that is very clear. And the role of NATMA comes in later after the 2014 flood in Kelantan, where the country have its own National Disaster Management Agency as a coordination body. But the management system, the response mechanism remains the same, meaning that it goes through those 3 tiers. I again look at the gaps here, where while we have level 1, 2 and 3, there's no level 0. Level 0 meaning community, the first responder, the one that are the most exposed to the risk. So if we can have something that empower the locals, this can close the gaps.
Disaster risk reduction and management in Japan basically comes from needs, because we have lots of disasters, and also from experience. There are many levels, also many layers of disaster management efforts in Japan, and we have also a long history of it. The 1995 Kobe earthquake, which killed about more than 6,000 people in just one event. I think until then, the Japanese public basically also think that when there's a disaster, the government should take care of everything to rescue them and do everything. But after the Kobe earthquake, many people realized that the community members have to help themselves. We have this 72 hours, the golden window, the survival time. And actually the disaster was so severe, so big, that the government couldn't be there for the communities, to rescue them. So the communities had to, save themselves and survive for a week or two because some communities were isolated. The government, as well as the people, realized that, this kind of community awareness or community empowerment is actually the key to strengthen disaster resilience. In Japan, the central government or the federal government in Malaysia doesn't really take the role of instructing or facilitating disaster risk reduction at the local level. This is the responsibility. It's been delegated to the local government already. And this is not only in Japan, but in many countries. It's like that because disasters are really site-specific. People in Putrajaya wouldn't have all the knowledge in some communities on the ground.
The first step is for communities to be aware of what type of early action they can take associated with specific disaster risks. So when we're talking about flood, we got to make sure that when the water levels are rising rapidly, we immediately evacuate. If we can, before we evacuate, we try to switch off all the electrical points. And once we have returned to our home, we got to make sure that we don't quickly switch it on because we would like to prevent a short circuit from happening. The second step is you got to make sure that we have a grab bag. So a grab bag should actually consist of a couple of necessary items that might be useful to us, especially during the first 24 to 48 hours of a disaster. Examples of items include tinned food, a pair of clean clothes, torchlight, copies of important identification documents. And the third step is we need to make sure that we get our information from verified and credible sources. Examples of credible sources are the National Disaster Management Agency, the Malaysian Meteorological Department. There's also applications available for you to get these information from, such as My Cuaca and My DIMS.
Disaster risk reduction is not as glamorous as emergency response or to spend money on huge mitigation project is for the fact that we cannot see the outcome clearly in a tangible way because this is human capital development. So in the effort of changing that mindset, this term resilience dividend was created, meaning that for every single cent that we invest in reducing disaster risk, in allowing everyone to be more prepared, it is about reducing loss and damages, but at the same time, creating co-benefits by investing on it. I'm sure most Malaysians are quite familiar with zombie movies. And it's all about survival. It's the same thing with disaster. Everyone is looking at NADMA here, but NADMA would not be able to do it alone if there's no coordinating support from other ministries and agencies. So in my opinion, every government agencies should have allocated budget for disaster risk reduction and preparedness. We should learn from the community should learn from people who are involved in governing things, NGOs should learn from each other. So it's a whole network of togetherness that will build up this concept of resilience. Reduce personal carbon footprints while waiting for trees planted this year to grow enough leaves. It has been an annual event with different scale and magnitude, and it gets worse over the years everyone knows the reason, the changing climate, extreme weather events.